Oh, we're off and rolling on a Friday. Chase Sr. in the house. It's the Krug Show, brought to you by Pig and a Pickle, the best barbecue in all of Northern California. Check them out. They're in Emeryville and Corte Madera. They're open 7 days a week from 11 a.m. till 8 p.m. or until they run out. Go say hi to Damon and Mary. Get some brisket. Tell them that Krug sent you. And we're also brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. Check the link in the description. Use the promo code Krug, K-R-U-E-G, and they will match you up to your first $100. Chase, what's going on, man? How's your Friday rolling?
Friday's great. Getting ready for the weekend. OTAs this week, minicamp next week. Anytime you have an opportunity to talk about position battles, roster battles, actual football, it's awesome. I'm down here in Dallas. We've had some crazy weather this week. I woke up on Tuesday after a good Memorial Day in which I had Monday off, and I get an alert at 6:30 a.m. 80-mile-per-hour winds, take shelter. I look outside my balcony, and it looks as though we're having a tornado. And then all this week, there's been rainstorms and just crazy weather here. But I've survived. I'm happy to be here in this weekly spot. Always enjoy chopping it up with you.
Yeah, seriously, good stuff. And we always appreciate you coming by. And maybe the big story right now is the details of the Jauan Jennings contract have hit. He's got a base salary in 2024 of $1.055 million, prorated signing bonus of $1.242 million, and there's no prorated option bonus. When you look at some of the details of the contract, what jumps out to you? It reduces the 2024 cap hit with void years. When you look at the entirety of the fine print on his deal, what stands out?
To me, it's just the value. Last week, we were here on the show talking about Jauan Jennings and how there was some chatter about some teams being interested in him. The Pittsburgh Steelers, once again, tapping into the wide receiver market, looking at some Niners receivers. We've seen Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Jauan Jennings, all involved in that speculation. And I had said, look, I'm not sure after drafting Ricky Pearsall and Jacob Cowing that a player like Jauan Jennings is going to be here in 2025 after he plays out the remainder of his deal on that RFA tender, which was less than $5 million, because I thought if I'm Jauan Jennings, I hit the open market, I can get that Kendrick Bourne type of deal. I'm an ascending player who's gotten better every year. I'm a great cultural fit, has that dog mentality. He plays with swagger, great blocker, clutch player who always seems to be in the right place at the right time. I really think his value on the open market, Larry, is $8 to $10 million. So when you're paying Jauan Jennings average annual value right around 5, it's a little bit more than that 4.9 on the RFA tender. But the fine print of the contract, I just talked about this on the show this morning. Base salary in 2024 of $1,025,000. It's 1.17. That's also the guaranteed money that he gets. And then the $1.2 million in prorated signing bonus. The per game roster bonus for him is really good. That's part of the reason why he can earn up to 15 plus million. That's $625,000. And then the cap number, totally affordable. 2.77 this year, and then 4.25 next year. So it's the value of the deal, the player that you're able to retain, his meaning for this Niners offense, and the fact that he's so widely respected across this entire organization.
What does it mean for Deebo? What does it mean for Ayuk? Is this like the handwriting's on the wall that this is it for Deebo? There's also some people speculating that maybe Deebo gets moved as soon as June 1st, which is tomorrow. Do you think Deebo gets moved after June 1st because of the advantageous cap situation, or do you think he's here all year? And what does the Jennings signing indicate about his future?
Right after the Super Bowl, I put together a graphic of all of the marquee players on the Niners roster, and the caption of the graphic was The Last Dance, a play on words for that legendary Michael Jordan documentary, which helped get us through COVID, which gave us some sports and some great things to talk about as content creators and sports talk show hosts. And I really firmly believe that this is going to be like the last dance for this core group of Niners players for 2024. And I'm going to continue to remain firm on that prediction that they run it back in 2024. You're going to see one of the deeper wide receiver cores in the entire NFL this year with Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Jauan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, Jacob Cowing, and then the battle for that 5th and 6th wide receiver spot is going to be a really good training camp battle. And I think that next offseason is when the Niners reassess. There is a complete possibility that the Niners do pay 2 wide receivers $25+ million. The Dolphins are now doing it with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. The Eagles are now doing it with Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. The 49ers can do that as well. But it's going to take a big Deebo Samuel year and a bounce back year after 2 down years in 2022 and 2023 in order for that to happen. I think what the Niners have done here and what this Jauan Jennings deal means is they have themselves some roster security here. They draft Pearsall, they draft Cowing. You now know that Jauan Jennings on an affordable deal is going to be under team control for 2024 and 2025. That's at the very least. And that gives you the roster flexibility because if you want to move on from Deebo, you can do that. If you want to run it back, you can do that too. And I do think that ultimately Brandon Ayuk does re-sign with San Francisco. I don't think that they run the risk of having a fractured locker room with him playing on an expiring deal and being a dead duck awaiting and playing under that 5th-year option. I think they extend him, but the Jennings contract just gives you flexibility in that wide receiver room. The Niners run it back, and it's kind of that last dance because I do think next offseason, whether it's Deebo, Kittle, Juszczyk, Hargrave, one of these highly paid players, they're not with this team going into 2025.
One of the videos that I did a week ago, and I saw you did one as well this week, and kind of mentioned him, is Tristan Wirfs.
Yeah,
you know, he's holding out in Tampa. You know, a lot of people felt like Wirfs was the guy the Niners should have drafted the year they drafted Kinlaw.
Yep.
And I'm not sure exactly if Wirfs was off the board by that point. He might have gone off the board maybe right before. But what do you think? I mean, is Wirfs, you think, going to make you know, is he going to work it out in Tampa and everything's going to be hunky dory, or do you think Tampa moves him? And I that video, I started watching it down at the Niner complex, and I only got about 3/4 of the way through, and I didn't get to finish because it was one of your longer videos. What was your consensus, and what were the reactions from the fans on Wirfs? And were you suggesting maybe Ayuk in a deal for Wirfs, or were you looking at it strictly from a draft pick compensation going back to Tampa? And what do you think of the viability of that? Because in a lot of ways, man, Tristan Wirfs, the Niners need a Tristan Wirfs more than they need Brandon Ayuk. Really, I mean, they're fortified at wide receiver. They're really not at right tackle.
How I phrased that was, this is my dream trade target for the Niners among all players in the NFL because of the need, the player, and the overall plan that you could have at your disposal if you were to trade for Tristan Wirfs. And what I meant by that was, you're weak at right tackle right now. So he has played right tackle. He's played left tackle. He could play right tackle for you for the foreseeable future. You sign him to that contract extension. And then once Trent Williams hangs it up, then he can move back to left tackle, and then you revisit what you do at that right tackle spot. And the consensus from the fans was something that you just referenced very quickly. Well, we should have just drafted him in the first place. And yeah, that's probably a bad draft miss, going with Javon Kinlaw, who's not with this team any longer. You didn't even exercise his 5th-year option. Now he's playing with the Jets, and you didn't draft Tristan Wirfs. Unfortunately for this organization, outside of making the trade, which was a steal, a highway robbery, and then paying Trent Williams, they haven't really highly invested into the offensive line. They drafted Aaron Banks in the 2nd round. That has worked out pretty solid because he's ended up being a good player for San Francisco, but who knows if he even gets a contract extension this offseason because he's in the final year of his rookie deal. So that's kind of the route that I took. As for the compensation, that's pretty interesting. You know, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are in a spot where they paid Baker Mayfield. They made Antoine Winfield the highest paid DB ever. They gave another bag to Mike Evans. They've taken care of their homegrown players, yet
except for Godwin. They haven't taken care of Godwin.
Not Godwin yet, but at a position of importance for a young player, they have not taken care of Tristan Wirfs yet, and he might hold out. And if he does hold out, what's going to happen. Now, Antoine Winfield did play out the remainder of his contract. Tristan Wirfs clearly doesn't want to do that. He wants that new deal. The compensation, it could be a wide receiver on this Niners team, but the Buccaneers, unfortunately, are kind of good at that position because you have Godwin and you have Chris Evans. For me, it would probably be draft compensation is what you would have to give up. And I think for a player of that pedigree, who's really, really good, who's been durable, who can play both sides of the line at both tackle spots, maybe 2 first-round picks. And are you willing to give up 2 first-round picks and then pay Tristan Wirfs? That's probably a little bit too steep for my asking, but that's why I kind of framed it as a dream trade scenario for me.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, he's a dream player. I'd rather go 1 and a 2 than 2 1s, especially after losing, 3 1s in the Lance situation. But but Wirfs, in a lot of ways, is the ideal guy. If you had Wirfs, he's your future at left tackle. He's your starter at right tackle. He checks a lot of boxes and would really be a foundation piece for this team going forward. So I'd be absolutely in favor of consummating a trade if he could bring him to San Francisco for any reasonable amount. I'm going to share the screen here because Chris Forster has an interesting quote that was interesting from the other day. Here's Forster down in Ninerland talking about kind of his philosophy on the draft and where to draft offensive linemen. Listen to this, and we'll talk about it in a sec.
Yeah, I don't know about that's for John and Kyle for the most part. My personal opinion, this is my personal opinion. If they ask me, invest in guys that touch the ball, guys that can touch the ball and score touchdowns. And then there's a range of guys, 2nd, 3rd, 4th round, 5th round even, that we will find starting offensive linemen in. At some point, can you draft? Yeah, you draft Trent Williams. You draft the pick of draft where you're getting a difference maker. But there's guys that can make difference that touch the ball well into 2nd, 3rd, 4th rounds, or 2nd, 3rd rounds at least, and definitely in the 1st round. That guy that touches the ball, it makes a huge difference in the game. The right guard makes a difference. We've talked about it before, but that's where we're able to find 4th and 5th round draft picks. And if they've been, you go find, it's how dominant is the difference between pick 34 versus pick 54 in offensive line play. And that's what you're trying to balance all the time. So will we best available player, all those types of things? Definitely will. And were we possibly ready to draft guys higher in the draft? Yes. But if there's somebody that can touch the ball and make plays, in my opinion, you asked me, Chris, do you want him? I want the guy that touches the ball for me, because I think we can develop those players much more readily and have developed those players through the time, because we do have a specific things that we're looking for. We know what we're looking for through the course of time. That's the advantage of being together with Kyle for so long, that we kind of can pigeonhole these guys. Are we always right? Heck no, we're not always right. And nobody is on anything. So yeah, could you put 5 first rounders across the front? I don't know that we have to have success. And it hasn't been that case as far as running the football and protecting the quarterback. Do we have, yeah, we don't have 5 first rounders. So there's always going to be that. But the fact that you can throw a short pass to Debo, even though the right tackle is getting beat, it ends up being a 60-yard touchdown. So yeah, the right tackle blocks somebody, but if the guy gets tackled at 5 yards, you don't have the 60-yard touchdown. Boy, that right tackle did a great job. What's it matter if the guy touching the ball can't take it to the house? So there's the trade-off, and you're constantly playing that game.
Yeah. What do you think? I mean, first of all, Chris can really talk. I mean, that was a lengthy cut, but this kind of goes beyond this regime. I mean, Bob McKittrick, the Niners did not draft offensive linemen very high. Harris Barton was a number 1 pick in the 80s, early 90s. Then you got Mike Iupati and Anthony Davis, who were 1st round picks in the same year. Other than that, the Niners, for the most part, don't use 1st round picks or even 2nd round picks on linemen that often. They did in round 2 or round 1, I think, for Joshua Garnett. That was a bust. They did in round 2 for Banks. He's been pretty good. What do you think? I mean, Philly, has obviously had a great offensive line. Lane Johnson was a 1st round pick. I don't remember if Kelsey was a 1st round pick or not.
He was
I would
a 6th rounder.
Yeah, so he was a late guy.
But Landon Dickerson in the 2nd round.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think? I mean, I kind of do agree. I'd go beyond that and say, you know what? What's really important is that you draft great players, whether it be offensive linemen, receivers, running backs, quarterbacks, any position. Just draft great players. Keep drafting great players regardless of position, and you'll be fine. Nobody is Indianapolis regretting the day they took Quentin Nelson? Probably not. But, how many Arizona Cardinals, I've watched the Cardinals under different regimes draft first-round offensive linemen for 25, 30 years, and they've got one trip to the Super Bowl to show for it. So where are you on what he just said? Do you agree with that they ought to prioritize position players and guys who handle the football, skill position guys over O-linemen?
I'm always of the belief that you go with the best player available. And that's why I kind of took issue with the Ricky Pearsall pick, is because at 31, I don't think that he was the best player available. I think it was a little bit of a reach. Now, so far, so good for him. I watched you and Dieter last night, and both of you very impressed with his professionalism, the refined route running. All of that is good. I also think that this is kind of going to come down to like a team-by-team basis, right? You can go Lane Johnson in the first round. You can go other offensive linemen in the first round. You can also get really good players in the second round, like Landon Dickerson was drafted in the second round. Creed Humphrey might be the best center in football with the Kansas City Chiefs. He was taken in the second round. For San Francisco, though, it's a little bit different, and that's why I talk about it from a team-by-team standpoint, because, yeah, you take players or maybe prioritize players who have the ball in their hands, they're impact skill players, and they can score touchdowns, right? But the Niners have those guys right now. They have Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle. They have their quarterback in Brock Purdy. They have some really good players on the defensive side that you might use first-round picks on, like a Nick Bosa, or a second-round pick on, like a Fred Warner. You got him in the third. You got Bosa in the first. My issue with San Francisco is that you have those skill players, yet you're still ignoring the offensive line, and you address it in the third round with Dominic Pooney. But the last couple of drafts, we've been saying the consensus, you need better right tackle play. You need better right tackle play. You can upgrade at center. You can upgrade at right guard. And they failed to do that. They didn't even draft an offensive lineman during the 2023 draft. I thought that was a big problem. They went with Jake Brendel, who's been a journeyman at right guard. They had issues there last year. Thankfully, John Feliciano able to step in. Colton McKivitz is a late rounder. And the Niners, they usually don't draft offensive tackles with shorter arms and a shorter wingspan. Colton McKivitz has that. So they went against their kind of philosophy in playing him at right tackle, and they're trying to get by with the affordability route, which I think has cost them in some of these big games. So I think you look at it at team-by-team basis. Like, yeah, you might want to take the playmaker who can score the touchdown. The Niners have those guys, though. And what do they need? Offensive lineman, a better right tackle, and they haven't drafted those players. And they got leapfrogged for Kingsley Suamataia and Roger Rosengarten by the Ravens and the Chiefs, and those are teams that you're kind of competing with. At 31, maybe there wasn't a good offensive tackle to take there, and I was totally okay with them not going offensive line. But in that second round, Jackson Powers-Johnson, Zach Frazier, a couple of players who we really liked. A little bit later, I like what the Bears did, Karan Amagaji, the right tackle out of Yale. So it's kind of a case-by-case, team-by-team basis for me.
Here we are. We're on the verge of June 1st. And so all the heavy lifting's been done on not just the Niner roster construction, really almost every roster around the league. And yet, if you look around at the remaining free agents, there's several good players that are still out there. At safety, Justin Simmons, Quandre Diggs, Micah Hyde, Jamal Adams, Eddie Jackson. Those guys are all still available. The Niners probably have a need there. Edge rusher-wise, Carl Lawson, Emmanuel Ogbah, Tyus Bowser, Yannick Ngakoue, Calais Campbell, they're all still out there available. And if you were looking for help at offensive tackle, DJ Humphries, Charles Leno, David Bakhtiari, Donovan Smith, Dwayne Brown, they're still out there. They're looking for a tight end. The Niners, Mercedes Lewis, a great blocking tight end. There's Logan Thomas, Blake Bell, the former Niner, the Belldozer, Jimmy Graham. There's good wide receivers, Hunter Renfrow, Sterling Shepard, Michael Thomas, Jamal Agnew, Russell Gage. I'm just kind of wondering, do you think that the 49ers will make any addition roster-wise of significance between now and camp? And if so, who would you go for?
There's some good players on that list. Obviously, some are a lot better than others. You look at a player like Justin Simmons. He's entering his age 31 season. He's a 4-time All-Pro. He has played really well under some complex defenses, starred under Vic Fangio. He leads the NFL in interceptions since coming into the league in 2016. The Niners, according to Mike Silver, looked into him earlier in free agency. And that's that type of center field ball hawking safety who, on top of the stellar play, and I don't think there are any signs of decline, he's also a great leader and a perennial team captain with the Denver Broncos. That's a player that I think would really move the needle. And you're not going to trot out a lot of 3 safety sets at the NFL level, but you can find ways to utilize Justin Simmons, Jair Brown, and Talanoa Hufanga. And Hufanga can kind of be that hybrid linebacker. He's a little bit too slow to be in the slot, but you can still find a way to get him on the field. So Justin Simmons would be intriguing to me. And he would be a massive upgrade that makes your defense a lot better right now. If you want to go with more of that Deshaun Gibson type, do you go after Eddie Jackson, who is a long way away from being the first team All-Pro that he was in 2018 and has had a couple of injuries the last couple of years, but has played decent football over the last couple of years. And if it weren't for those injuries, he was starting to find his stride a little bit. Quandre Diggs is a player who's really respected. I think at that safety position, you could use some more depth in the way of how you brought in Deshaun Gibson a couple of years ago, and he ended up playing really, really well for you. My favorite edge rusher of that crew is probably Emmanuel Ogbah. Yannick Ngakoue is a player who, up until last year when he got hurt, every year that he had been in the NFL, going all the way back to 2016 when he was a rookie, he had been able to rack up at least 8 sacks. Now, this is a player who's bad against the run, but he can get after the quarterback. Are you confident in your Gross Matos and Drake Jackson as backups behind Leonard Floyd and Nick Bosa? If you're not, maybe you look to get a depth piece there. Outside of that, I think San Francisco is pretty set at every other position. You know, linebacker, they're good. I want to see what D. Winters and Jalen Graham can do. At defensive tackle, maybe you could use some depth there, but I think they like Evan Anderson, and
he looked good, by the way.
What you've seen from Evan Anderson.
I love the way he moved around. I didn't realize he was number 60. And then I watched what I had kind of taped from minicamp, and man, just, you know, he is moving so much better at 315 pounds than when you watched his film when he was closer to 350. And he's still maintaining great strength. So I don't know. He's going to be he'll be fun to watch this summer.
And they gave him $260,000 in guaranteed money, which is pretty much practice squad money. So that's a player out of FAU to watch. I don't know if you need to make a move there, and hopefully Kalia Davis can stay healthy and make a little bit of a leap. You also have Jordan Elliott as a backup. And then along the offensive line, there just are not good options left in free agency. So I think what you're looking at, the aforementioned players at safety, maybe edge rusher. But other than that, I think San Francisco is pretty set with a roster that still has the premium talent from last year, has a little bit more depth in some spots this year, and is still top to bottom one of the best rosters in the NFL.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned, to be honest, about Drake Jackson and Robert Beal and trying to lean on those guys. So it's like if you could get a Carl Lawson or an Ogbah or somebody like a veteran to add to their mix, you know, I think that would be good. One of the stories of the week is that Javon Hargrave believes that his conditioning can improve in 2024. And I've been eager to talk to you about him all week because you saw him in Philly and saw him in Pittsburgh and now got a chance to see him up close with the Niners this last year. I would kind of contend that even though, man, that was a celebrated signing as, wow, look, you know, can you wait? We can't wait until we can see Bosa and Hargrave on the same line. How will O-lines be able to block these guys? And you can't double everybody and blah, 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 blah. And then Hargrave comes in, and to pay for his exorbitant contract, they had to cut loose a bunch of guys, including Samson Ebukam and Emmanuel Mosley and Jimmy Ward and
Charles Omenihu
and you know, Aziz Al-Shaair and the gigantic nose guard they lost out on as well. Why is his name escaping me right now? But Hassan Ridgeway.
Yeah.
A bunch of guys. I mean, they lost, and all of those guys were good against the run. And then suddenly this year, they weren't very good against the run. My contention would be if you could just reverse that last off season, not sign Hargrave and just re-sign, let's say 4 or 5 of your top run defenders that you kissed off because to give that money to Hargrave, I think the Niners win the Super Bowl. I think that move was a headline grabber, and everybody was like, yeah, it was awesome. I think that might be the reason they didn't win. I was very unimpressed with Hargrave. What do you think, though, Chase? Because you saw Hargrave in Philly. Was Hargrave in Philly in a lot better shape than Hargrave in San Francisco in your mind?
Yeah. This signing kind of came out of nowhere. And going into free agency in 2023, I had him listed as a free agent candidate, a free agent target for San Francisco, just because, I had the same thought of Hargrave, Bosa. You get better at defensive tackle. You team him up alongside Eric Armstead, and you can really try to dominate the interior of the line, take some double teams naturally away from Nick Bosa. It was a classic case of him in his 29-year-old season with Philadelphia, going to the Super Bowl, having a career year, double-digit sacks for the first time. He had 11. And on top of that, 10 TFLs and 16 quarterback hits, and he cashed in. The concern that I did have, though, was that the Niners needed to get a little bit better against the run, and Javon Hargrave was not going to help you against the run at all. He's historically been a pass rushing defensive tackle, and he has been a bad player at defensive tackle in trying to stop the run. And that's what happened last year for San Francisco. Like, in a down year, he actually played not terribly from a pass rushing standpoint. He still had 7 sacks. He still had 52 total pressures and 38 hurries. So if he's in better shape, and if he goes back to the 2022 form, that's of course great. But against the run, he was awful. He had a run defense grade of 49. His overall grade was 73.9. His pass rush grade last year was 87.2. Now, it was a little bit Jekyll and Hyde, where I think against the Giants, he had that really good game. And then for a while, he didn't do anything. So consistency and being better against the run is something that he needs to improve upon. Oddly enough, I thought that he was actually pretty good against the run in the Super Bowl. But when you pay a player that much money, you're totally right. You lose out on some other depth pieces, and you lost out on depth pieces along the defensive line specifically who helped you against the run. And in turn, that defensive line once again kind of wore down a little bit toward the end of last year. The age concerns me, but if he can be in better shape, because he's a big dude who, as Mike Mayock would say, has a big bubble butt. If he can slim up a little bit, I think that hopefully he can have a rebound season, because this is what the Niners need, is for him to play better.
No question. He's got to play like the guy they're paying him to be. Otherwise, it's like that's a terrible trade-off. I hate trading 5 for 1 anyway, ever, whether it be draft picks or veterans. And they kind of essentially, even though it was a free agent signing, it was almost like a trade. And I think they got the worst end of it, at least to this point. What do you think as far as special teams? You saw Brian Schneider talking about the new return rules. What struck me was just how new this is to him, and how like everything seems very undecided. Like, hey, we just have to see how this goes. And my question to him was like, Brian, you got every kind of return man known to man in this camp. And I'm like, what's the depth chart? Who's atop the depth chart here? What are we looking for? And he wouldn't answer the depth chart part. And I don't even know if they have one right now, but he did agree that they've got every kind of return guy. They got Trent Taylor, who's very sure-handed. They've got Danny Gray, who's tiny but fast. They've got Isaac Guerrero, who's a running back with receiving skills. They've got Juice. They've got Debo. They've got Ayuk. They've got,
Ricky
Pearsall. They've got, smallish guys, bigger guys. They could go with guys who are very sure-handed. What do you think? I mean, do you think that this is, if you had to guess, do you think that the smart teams in the league go for the sure-handed Trent Taylor, don't fumble the ball approach and just don't lose the game on special teams? Or do you think teams get super aggressive and are going for the, trying to win the game on special teams as there's this kind of adjustment period where everybody kind of figures out, risk reward and what their game plan is going to be? Because it's pretty clear listening to Schneider that the Niners game plan is still in the formulating stages.
This is so interesting because when the news came out of the new kickoff, so many people were against it, saying the kickoff is dead. And I'm saying, well, hold on. The kickoff was dead. I think this brings it alive again because of a couple of reasons. One, it involves strategy. Two, it's a way for your playmakers to get their hands on the football once again. And three, were you okay with the previous rule in which we saw touchbacks at a historic rate where we barely saw kickoffs? For me, this is now a kickoff in which the smart teams will win. The smart teams will find a way to make this beneficial and advantageous to set their offense up for really good field position. Because if you kick the ball out of the end zone or if you kick the ball out of bounds, there's a penalty here. So the kickoff team has to be precise with where they kick the football. And for the returning team, usually historically, you're like, unless it's a game on the line or a game that's close or a game of a large magnitude, we don't want to put Deebo Samuel back there because you have free runners running full speed. They're going to hit him. Now that's not the case because the return team takes off once the returner fetches the football. So they're not going to have that momentum. What I would do if I'm the Niners, Deebo, you've had down years in 2022, 2023 since signing that contract. You consider yourself a playmaker. You're one of the most elite playmakers of this modern era. Let's put you back there and let's find a way to block this up to allow Deebo to just impact the game in another area. Okay, Deebo isn't going to return a couple of kicks. Then you have the sure-handed Trent Taylor. You have the speed burner and Danny Gray. Maybe that's an opportunity for him to make this roster because right now he might be on the outside looking in. Ronnie Bell had some punt return experience last year. He struggled, but that's another option. Ricky Pearsall can't find a way to get on the field. This is your way to show that you can use that footwork and that short area burst, the vertical leap, and that acceleration, deceleration to find a way to impact the game. And I think that, at least I'm hopeful, that maybe the Niners are in a stage right now where they're trying to formulate a plan for which players they utilize for this new kick return. Because if they're going into this blind and they're like, we'll figure it out on the fly, they're going to be behind the eight ball here. They've been a smart organization. They've been a well-coached organization. To me, it comes down to this. It's simple. Find a way to put your best players back there and come up with some splash plays because you have all of those athletes at your disposal on this roster.
Yeah, I don't think you can just be like, hey, we're going to sit it out. I think you got to get in there and you got to compete.
Yeah.
You're always competing for dynamic players, dynamic plays. And to me, to sit this one out and just be like, we'll go with Trent Taylor and we just won't fumble. I think that's too short-sighted and not aggressive enough as far as seeking out the best result. George Kittle told us he was hurt for a good portion of the year last year. What do you think? Does that change your impression of the year that Kittle had? And also, it's like, who is tight end 2 on this team right now? I mean, is it going to be Mason Pline? I mean, he actually played a significant role in this minicamp. It's funny, too, because I look at him as a receiver who needs work with his blocking. I've heard other people say he's a blocker who needs help with his receiving. I don't see it that way. I see him as a really good receiver with, maybe a little underpowered blocking wise. But is it Latu? Is it Willis? Is it Saubert? Is it going to be somebody from outside the organization? Who do you think is going to be tight end 2? And what do you think of the report that Kittle was, less than 100% from week 10 on or something like that?
Look, shout out to George Kittle playing through this injury. Not easy. And he kind of epitomizes what the Niners look for in players to be a part of their organization as a team captain, as a team leader. Always plays hard, always plays to the whistle. He's physical. He's got that confidence. He has that lively spirit. I think that's important inside a locker room to have a guy like this. And how about the career that he's putting together now? He was a second-team All-Pro in 2018. He was a first-team All-Pro in 2019. He got that contract. Then he was hurt. He was a Pro Bowler in 2021. And in the last year and a half, Larry, he's been the best tight end in the game. And I don't think it's particularly close because Travis Kelce slid last year. The back half of 2022 is when he came alive because Brock Purdy helped elevate his game to another level. He had 11 touchdowns, second team All-Pro and a Pro Bowler. And last year, first 1,000-yard season since 2019, first team All-Pro and a Pro Bowler, more than 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns. And he's able to put up those numbers despite Christian McCaffrey having more than 2,000 all-purpose yards, Brandon Ayuk having a career year, and even in a down year, Deebo Samuel still able to have more than 1,000 all-purpose yards. So for him to put up that production with the injuries, I think it's really impressive. If he were on another team, he'd probably be utilized a little bit more. He's kind of on this borderline Hall of Fame track right now. So those are my thoughts on George Kittle and what he's been able to do last year and a half. He's been on fire, and I don't think that the prime years are dwindling just yet. As for the backup tight end, a little bit earlier, we're talking about moves that the Niners could make in free agency. Backup tight end is a problem. They tried to get Brock Wright from the Detroit Lions and sign him to that RFA tender or tag or whatever, and then the Lions matched that deal. They brought him back. Kyle Shanahan said after the draft, I really wish in hindsight we could have drafted a tight end. It didn't work out in our favor. So tight end 2 is a huge question mark. Cam Latu still hasn't practiced. He's still coming off the torn meniscus. And last year in the preseason and in training camp, you were there. He dropped every football pretty much that came his way. Braden Willis is a little bit shorter, kind of that H-back tight end type of player. Can he be a tight end too? Eric Saubert, I don't see it there. Mason Pline has a good opportunity, and I know that you can shed some insight on Mason Pline. Does he realistically have a shot to be tight end too? I'm not sure. Does he have a chance to make the 53-man roster? I think he could, but backup tight end, if Kittle goes down, that's not good. And I do think that played into the role, or the decision-making, I should say, in bringing back Jauan Jennings. And I think maybe you see a philosophical shift from Shanahan. He looks at that Super Bowl tape. We couldn't beat press man. Let's spread it out a little bit more. Jauan Jennings is not a tight end, but now you have a couple of slot guys that you could utilize out of the slot with Deebo and Ayuk being on the outside. You have that flexibility, but tight end behind George Kittle, I think, is a big problem.
Yeah, no, I mean, that to me is going to be, I'm eager to see, do they add another veteran guy? And if so, is it a blocker? Is it a receiver? Pline to me looks, the more I watch him move around, he reminds me a lot of Brent Jones. Mm-hmm. He's a little knock-kneed, and when you look at him standing there, you're like, that guy shouldn't be able to run, but he actually can run pretty well. But he kind of reminds me of Brent Jones, who was more of a receiver than a blocker, became a good, decent blocker. I think this guy's more of a receiver than a blocker. He's a bigger bodied guy than Brent. Brent was like 6'3", 6'4". This guy's more like 6'6", 6'7", but very similar. Understands where the soft spots are in the zone, better receiver than you think, smart as hell, doesn't make the same mistake twice. He's got a lot to learn, but he's really coming on. So, I mean, to me, Pline's interesting, but man, I mean, he's an undrafted free agent who didn't play a lot of college football. Do you make him tight end too?
Right.
Do you go out into the veteran market? I mean, it's going to be interesting. The other interesting thing is, with June 1st coming, there's still people that, the two guys offensively, I thought that really looked good in the mini camp was Pearsall and Cowing. Pearsall made a couple of really nice plays, but he just showed that ability to separate. And it's pretty clear that him and Brock are doing work together. And then Cowing is a guy who can separate vertically down the field. And, he ran like a deep cross and Purdy threw it to him and he went up in a crowd and caught it and brought it down. And it's just like you're watching this guy and you're thinking, as much as Brock likes to attack down the field and loves the middle of the field and the kind of separation that Cowing typically is getting on these routes where he's running downfield, I could see Purdy to Cowing being a prolific situation. And a lot of rookie receivers don't produce at a high rate. I think this guy really could, just because he's got the trust of Brock and he's got good ball skills and he's got legit speed to separate. And Brock loves to take chances down the field.
People have raved about his toughness too, and people have raved about the toughness of Ricky Pearsall. He'll get hit, he'll pop right back up and isn't even fazed by that. And Jacob Cowing is an interesting player who height, weight, usage player reminds me a little bit of a Tyler Lockett, especially from a toughness standpoint too. Like he'll run that post and he's not a big target, doesn't have a big wingspan, but he's going to find a way to get the football. And that short area wiggle, the short area quickness, which gives you that ability to kind of win in the phone booth, the acceleration, deceleration, you're going to be matched up against some slower nickels, some linebackers. Ricky Pearsall and Jacob Cowing could be matchup nightmares. And I think that went into the role, that went into the decision-making for San Francisco to draft those two players where they're like, man, you know, you look back at that Super Bowl tape, we didn't have the press man beaters, but now with Cowing and Pearsall, you try to jam them at the line and you miss and they get by you. They slip to that second level and they're so smart and heady where they're going to find the soft spot in the zone. They're going to find that spot if they're playing man or beat man coverage. And it just gives you more offensive versatility, more offensive diversity. And these are players who have been very experienced at the college level. They've also put up a lot of production at the college level. And I don't think they're going to be phased. I get their pros type of takeaway from Pearsall and Cowing, where they're seasoned players who, again, have played a lot. And I think that experience does wonders. Look at how much the experience at college helped out Brock Purdy, making that seamless transition from Iowa State to the NFL level. So once the pad comes on, or once the pads come on in training camp, and then even during mandatory minicamp next week, I'm excited to see both Cowing and Pearsall, their continued development. And once the bullets start flying, what do they look like within this offense? And can they sniff snaps right from the jump at a deep position?
Two last ones before we let you go. ESPN lists the Niners as the Super Bowl favorite. You think they should be? I mean, you know, you got Kansas City, you got Detroit, Green Bay, Philly, Buffalo, you know, Baltimore, Houston. There's some other really, really good teams in the NFL. And yet the Niners, you know, I think they were like 16-1, but I think that was the favorite right now. Should the Niners be the favorite here as the calendar turns to June for Super Bowl 59 in New Orleans?
You and I talked about this last week. Kansas City Chiefs should be the favorite. They've won back-to-back Super Bowls. They have the best defense in the NFL. And now they have added Xavier Worthy, who's flashing cash on social media, as well as Marquise Hollywood Brown. And you add 2 4-2, 4-3 guys to that offense. Now we'll see what happens with Rashee Rice. Travis Kelce has to rebound, but in the playoffs, he came alive. Their offensive line, a solid unit. They've done a lot since losing that Super Bowl against Tampa Bay in making sure that the offensive line is better, because Mahomes in that Super Bowl loss to Tampa Bay was running for his life as the Buccaneers set the record for the most quarterback pressures generated in a Super Bowl. So I think that they, with Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, the aforementioned weapons defensively, they've won back-to-back championships. They should be the Super Bowl favorites. Should the Niners be up there? For sure. They still have one of the most talented rosters in the NFL. They're a couple of bad bounces and self-inflicted wounds away from celebrating their 6th Lombardi trophy in the history of the organization, but they haven't been able to get over the top. The one thing, Larry, that concerns me with the Niners, they've now made it to 4 NFC championship games in 5 years. They've made it to 3 straight NFC championship games. And in the Super Bowl, they're a physical team. They've still been injured a lot. They found ways to escape the injury bug still and still be successful. But now they have the largest rest disadvantage since 1990. And they're coming off not only a physical season and seasons consecutively in which they've played a lot of football, but the rest is not on their side. They're starting to get a little bit older, but they're also coming off the human nature aspect of this. Can they recover mentally? Can they recover spiritually? Their hearts have been broken. Now, you can speak to the energy that you've seen at OTAs. I've heard that it's been pretty good. It's awesome to see Nick Bosa and Deebo Samuel at these voluntary practice sessions, but those are some of the concerns that I have with the Niners as far as being Super Bowl favorites and getting back there. They have the talent, but are they going to be able to escape the injury bug with a tough schedule too?
Let's finish with Purdy. You know, it's funny. There was Emmanuel Sanders went on with Kay Adams, and he was saying, hey, you know, I talked to Deebo, and Deebo said, hey, when Brock Purdy got in the huddle, He's all business, and he really takes control. There were, people talking about, Logan Ryan was talking about the Niner culture and how, normally there's 10 or 15 guys hanging out in a bye week in the weight room, and there was like 40 guys, and Purdy's in there and he's working out, and Christian and Bosa and all these guys. And he just kind of spoke to the Niner culture, which is obviously they prepare hard. But then you had Chris Sims, who, God bless him. I thought he was a big Purdy fan, but, he was, I guess, a Lance guy. I don't know if he was a Lance guy or not, but he's obviously not a Purdy guy. He's got him ranked 17th.
Guy had Kellen Mond as his number one quarterback a few years ago. So.
Yeah, I mean, and I said, hey, I put out a tweet like, hey, this is Chris Sims' stats, and people are like, well, his stats, shouldn't matter. Well, no, you're right. Two things can be equally true. He could have been a really bad NFL quarterback and a really bad analyst of current NFL quarterbacks. Right. He's not a bad analyst because he was a bad player, but he might be a bad analyst and a bad player. But either way, I went through the list and went through quarterbacks, and I've got Josh Allen and, Lamar and Burrow and, CJ Stroud, Mahomes, Herbert, Love, Stafford, maybe Rodgers, if you want to say lifetime achievement, maybe one or two others. But I mean, we're talking about, 7 or 8 names. That's probably where I'd put Purdy. Right about there, right? Somewhere he's not top 5, but he's between 5 and 10. And that's where I would rank him. He ranks him 17th. And I just think that's just so ridiculous. And then he went on to say that, he's a product of Kyle's system. We all know him and Kyle played at Texas together, so he's a big fan of Kyle. Okay, but I mean, everybody's a product of their system and their surroundings to some degree. And then he said, hey, his motion is just slow and elongated and lacks efficiency. And we're talking about a guy who's 17-4 in 21 starts in the NFL with great numbers. He's top 2 or 3 in almost every meaningful passing category. Where would you what did you think of Sims ranking him 17th? Is that just haterade right there? And where would you rank Purdy?
It's a joke. And these types of things are just done for clickbait and show recognition. It just doesn't make any sense to me. How in your right mind can you say, as a former quarterback, that Brock Purdy is 17th when, as a former quarterback, you should know that there are things that Brock Purdy does that make up for his lack of arm strength, his lack of build, him being small in stature. Also things that you should appreciate as a quarterback that make some of the great quarterbacks great. Brock Purdy's processing ability, being able to throw wide receivers open, being able to fit the ball into tight windows, being able to recognize the blitz, being able to process what defenses are doing and still provide splash plays. Him having the number 1 deep ball completion rate, despite his wide receiver separation being number 14. My coworker, Jack Sperry, is a great football analyst. He put together the top 10 most valuable NFL quarterbacks per pass attempt on 3rd and long situations. Brock Purdy was 3rd behind Kirk Cousins and Dak Prescott. So he does these things in these really important categories and areas, which make him elite, and he elevates his other players. And he goes outside of the system and the scheme to do that. I get it. He has a great coach. He has really good playmakers. But this 49ers offense had the return of the deep ball last year, really for the first time under Shanahan with the Niners, had the deep ball as part of the offense. They had the number 1 overall offense in the NFL. You had all these players having career years. That is not, something that should be taken lightly. Brock Purdy helped make that happen. And visually, when you go from watching Jimmy Garoppolo to Brock Purdy, it was a completely different offense. So Brock Purdy, for me, I'm with you. He's probably in that 7 to 10 range of being, a top 10 quarterback in this league. And I'll tell you this, if he goes out there and he duplicates what he did in 2024 with what he did in 2023, you're going to be talking about him as a top 5 guy. Now, he doesn't do things at a special athletic level, like Patrick Mahomes or Justin Herbert or Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen, right? But Tom Brady wasn't the greatest athlete. Joe Montana wasn't the greatest athlete. What they did, though, processing, touch, accuracy, feel, big time player, that when you're staring in the face of adversity, how do you respond to that? Can you lead a comeback late? Can you win a clutch game? Can you put together a clutch drive? Brock Purdy's been able to do all of this. So I just don't see how you can rank him 17th in the NFL. That's middle of the pack. That's worse than middle of the pack. 32 starters in the NFL.
Yeah. And is your read on that this guy's just not a very good analyst? Or because a lot of times people will say, well, if it's coming from Sims, it's coming from Shanahan. And some people have suggested that maybe Shanahan's, trying to utilize Sims to get a better contractual environment, let's say, when they go to extend Purdy, because there's people talking down about him. Or is it possible that maybe Kyle's not as big a fan of Purdy as we think, and he's being honest in his dialogue with Sims, and Sims is just kind of regurgitating that in a public forum? Is it what's your read on that? Do you think Kyle is losing enthusiasm for Purdy? Do you think it's about getting a better price on the contract? I mean, otherwise, or is Sims just not a very good evaluator?
I mean, look, Chris Sims had Kellen Mond as his number one quarterback, and now Kellen Mond can't even crack a roster or get playing time, and he stinks, right?
Right.
And I know that Sims and Shanahan are very tight, but it just goes against everything that Kyle Shanahan has said. And how could Kyle Shanahan say that when Brock Purdy's gone out there and has made it to 2 straight NFC championship games, could have been back-to-back Super Bowls if he didn't rip open his elbow, and has gone 17-4 and has put up great efficiency numbers. He's been a perfect fit for what Kyle Shanahan wants in a quarterback. He's run his system masterfully, and he's helped elevate the playmakers. So I think this is just a off-base opinion by Chris Sims to try to get some off-season engagement. I don't think that this is coming from Kyle, because Kyle even said, after the first couple of practices, I looked at Jed York and said, he might be our number one quarterback. Maybe not now, but at some point down the road. And he's been overly complimentary of Brock. Could it be a negotiating tactic to drive that price down? Yeah, it could be. But again, if Purdy goes out and he slings the pill and he balls out in 2024, I don't care what happens. You're going to have to give him the Brinks truck.
Awesome stuff, man. I know you cover the Eagles as well, and I always like to kind of check in on them, because to me, they're one of the preeminent contenders for the Super Bowl in the NFC. What's the big talk in Eagle land when you're doing these kinds of dialogues with Eagle content creators? Who's the talk of their mini camp? Who's the talk of their off season? What are Eagles fans excited about right now?
It's funny because, like the Niners, they are really deep at cornerback for the first time in a long time. And the player that's been tearing it up during OTAs is Isaiah Rodgers, who's coming off a gambling suspension from last year. But 2 years ago with Indianapolis, he graded out really well according to Pro Football Focus. And he's come off that gambling suspension. He had a pick 6 of Jalen Hurts yesterday, making a couple of really good plays on the ball. And with James Bradbury not showing up, Darius Slay out this week, and Keely Ringo back, it was Keely Ringo, Isaiah Rodgers as the top corners. So he's kind of been the talk of OTAs so far. And then the defense under Vic Fangio is getting some chatter. Jordan Davis slimming down 25 pounds is a big talking point. Him and Jalen Carter really working on their conditioning levels. And Kellen Moore implementing a lot more pre-snap motion. The Eagles were 32nd in pre-snap motion last year. I expect them to be top 10 this year, and that offense to look completely different. So those are some of the early talking points so far.
Good stuff, man. What do you got cooking on your Friday? What's left to do? Are you doing videos? You done for the day? What's your Friday looking like?
Not done for the day at this hour. Still a lot to get to. Earlier today, I did put out an updated OTAs winners and losers, so that's up on the channel right now. We'll take some clips from this show, put it up on the channel this week. I'm not sure if you saw that Tim Kawakami piece about Jed York and whether or not he's going to pay up or try to be financially conservative, but I did a segment on that a little bit earlier this week. That's going to come out over the weekend. I thought Kawakami did a good job of kind of looking at where the Niners could be heading from a financial standpoint and some of the big decisions to make with Christian McCaffrey, with Brandon Ayuk, and overall the future outlook of this organization, how much money they've been able to rake in, and how long they're going to try to milk out this core being together. So be on the lookout for that as well.
Good stuff. Always appreciate you on a Friday, man. Have a great Friday. Thanks to Pig and a Pickle. Thanks to Underdog Fantasy. Thanks to all of you guys. Have a great Friday. For Chase, I'm Larry. Peace.
Yeah, never met a man I've been scared of. Careful.